so much, brother. And it's so good to see your beautiful faces. And it says down there there's 102 participants. Obviously, 102 can't get on the screen at the same time, but I hope you can hear me okay. And I'm sorry that you have to see me, but anyway, I hope you can hear me. Wow. Will the real Messiah please stand up? Let me go back. I had 17 wonderful years of ministry with the Friends of Israel gospel ministry. Traveled to Israel, traveled around speaking in churches and training new workers with the Friends of Israel. And then the Lord led me out to California, but I did not leave behind my love for Israel and the Jewish people. And that has been manifested through our campus in Israel, IBEX, Israel Bible Extension Campus of the Master's College. And I've continued to visit that land. So you can take the guy out of Friends of Israel, but you can't take Friends of Israel out of the guy. So I still love Israel and love the Jewish people. And of course, we're watching every day with issues and very aware of what's going on over there. But let's get to our subject. Will the real Messiah please stand up? Let me say that many years ago, I wrote a little pamphlet called Will the Real Messiah Please Stand Up? Actually, I did not approach the brothers and sisters at FOI about this. They approached me and they mentioned this subject. Okay, so I immediately thought about this brochure. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but let me just read to you the opening, which will be a good way to start this whole issue about not only the Messiah, but false messiahs and wrong messiahs and messiahs that really have broken the heart of the Jewish people instead of helping them. Let me just read it. I was ministering in Detroit, Michigan, and I tried to contact a local rabbi, and I said, can I bring some folks from the church? We want to learn more about Jewish people. So that's where this begins. Quote, we nearly fell out of our cushioned synagogue seats when we heard the rabbi's answer. I had accompanied a group of believers from a suburban Detroit church to a conservative synagogue to learn more about Jewish beliefs and customs. We had been given an excellent tour of the synagogue, and now the rabbi, as they usually do, was answering some questions. One of our group, and it's a question that always comes up, is, Rabbi, what do Jews believe about the Messiah? I kid you not, this was his response. The rabbi's startling answer was, quote, God has delivered the Jewish people from many trials during our history, and he will deliver us also from the Messiah. Well, we were like stunned. We didn't expect that response. After we recovered from our shock, God will deliver us also from the Messiah, we inquired further about the meaning of his strange answer. The rabbi then elaborated on the numerous false messiahs that have appeared to Israel over the centuries. These pseudo-messiahs had really inflicted much pain on the Jewish community by shattering many unnecessarily raised hopes and aspirations. And the damage inflicted by them on the Jewish community was so great that many Jews no longer believed in a personal Messiah. And that was the background for his statement. God will deliver us from the Messiah. What he meant by that is that we've had too many false messiahs, raised our hopes and shattered them, and God will deliver us from the messiahs. Well, he said many of us no longer believe in a personal Messiah because of these false messiahs, and he included himself, can you believe, conservative rabbi, among those doubters. That's will introduce what I'd like to look at today. Today, we're going to look at those false messiahs. And oh my, there's probably 2 to 3 dozen that are prominent. We're only going to look at 3 or 4 who professed to be the Messiah and, of course, ended up not being the Messiah. And the damage and the pain that really inflicted on Jewish people by raising their hopes and then dashing them. Their stories are strange, let me tell you. But before we look at those individuals, we'll look at about 3 or 4 of them, bringing them right up to the modern day. Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Hasidic Rebbe, who was buried. Well, they think he was buried 30 years ago. But before we do that, I'd like to just do a little background there. The Bible actually warns us about false messiahs, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. I'm thinking of 2 texts in the Old Testament that actually warn Israel that there might be some false prophets and false messiahs that come someday, and this is how you can tell who they are. In Deuteronomy 18 and Deuteronomy 13, there's a reason I have them in that order. Deuteronomy 18 comes within a section of Deuteronomy of 2 chapters where, interestingly, regulations for the king, for priests, and prophets are given. Sound familiar? Prophet, priest, and king. The 3 anointed ones among the Old Testament and the Jewish people, those 3 anointed ones were, you might call, messiahs. And I call them messiahs with a lowercase m, because Messiah means anointed one. So there's 2 chapters here that give the regulations for the king Messiah, the king anointed one, the priests in chapter 18. And then in chapter 18, we've got regulations for the prophet. Now, when the Messiah comes, he would be a prophet in addition to being a priest and king. That's the faith of believers in Messiah. So what is it said there? After giving some regulations about the prophet, which really was fulfilled in the prophet coming to earth as the prophet with a capital P, I should say. So he says this, I will raise up a prophet like me. But then he gives a warning, but the prophet who speaks presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, Deuteronomy 18:20, that prophet shall die. Wow, strong warning. Now you may say in your heart, how will we know the word which the Lord or Yahweh has not spoken? And Moses says, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which Yahweh has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. What's a standard for a biblical prophet, an anointed one, and the Messiah will be a prophet, is that he never misses, okay? He always gets it right. Every prophecy that he gives that can be tested will be true. I played baseball in South Carolina, played softball up north, and I love stories about ball players. One of the things a good hitter has is a good batting average. And your average is determined by how many times you come to the plate and how many hits do you get, okay? And a good batting average would be about 300, 350, which means 1/3 of the time you get a hit, okay? But that means 2/3 of the time you make an out. Let me tell you, let me use a baseball illustration. The Messiah, the prophet, when he comes, he must bat 1,000. He never makes an out. He always gets a hit. And if he fails and makes an out, in other words, if he gives a prophecy and that doesn't come true, it's a high standard. Moses says he's a false prophet. Don't listen to him. Wow. So a certified prophet and the certified messianic prophet must give valid prophecies that are validated and that can be tested and are correct. But then in Deuteronomy 13 is the other, and that's why I went backwards. In Deuteronomy 13, we read, well, what if a guy gives a quote prophecy and it comes to pass? How can you know that that is from the Lord? Well, he must not only be one who always gives certified, validated prophecies that come true, he must speak according to the Torah, according to the revelation. So if somebody might appear to give a prophecy, I mean, there are guys that come on, I call them Channel 15 in our area, and they're prophets and they give a prophecy and it looks like it comes to pass, but they're not teaching according to the word of God. Don't listen to them. So those are the high standards. He must give validated prophecies that can be shown to be true. And then secondly, he even if he can guess and get it right, you look at your horoscope. This morning says, today you will meet an interesting person. And then you meet an interesting person. And oh boy, does that mean horoscopes are true? Of course not. Just a lucky guess. So there's two standards. His doctrine must be valid according to the word of God. And secondly, he must give validated prophecies that can be tested. And of course, when we get next week to Jesus, those things are true. Now, that's the Old Testament. In the New Testament, let's go to the words of Jesus himself in Matthew 24. In Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, Jesus gives some warnings about false prophets and guess what? False messiahs. In Matthew 24:4, he says, Jesus answered and said, see to it that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. Now, you know well enough, I know these are students, Friends of Israel students, you know that the word Christ, Christos, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, or Messiah. And so Christos is an anointed one, or the Messiah. Whenever you see Jesus Christ, it's Jesus the Messiah. Time for a silly story. Okay, Jesus is born. Mary and Joseph take Jesus to the Bethlehem City Hall to record his birth. And there's a Jewish guy sitting there and says, okay, what's the kid's name? Well, the kid's name is Jesus Christ. And the guy says, no, what's your name? She says, well, I'm Mary Christ, and this is my husband, Joseph Christ. No, that did not take place. Because Christ was not their last name. Christ was not Jesus' last name. It wasn't Mary's last name. The silliness of that points up the fact that it's a title. Jesus Christ is Jesus Messiah. Now he says, many will come in my name, listen to that, saying, I am the Christ, I am the Messiah. Many. And will deceive many. And what we're going to be talking about today is the fulfillment of Matthew 24:4. When to the Jewish people, many people came and said, I am the Messiah. And they will deceive many. Down in verse 11, he says, many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And then it says in Matthew 24:24, false Christs and false prophets will arise. And notice, even show great signs and wonders, so to deceive, if possible, even the elect. There might be some who do some tricks, and it looks like they're miracles, but that doesn't validate them as the true Messiah. What validates them as the true Messiah? Tested prophecies that can be proven and orthodox doctrine. So Jesus himself, the true Messiah, gives in the Olivet Discourse a warning that there's going to be coming some false messiahs. Now, we don't have the PowerPoint to show you. Maybe it'll come up next week. But on the PowerPoint, it's got a picture. Maybe you can go back and see the announcement and see something about the picture there. But I want to introduce you to 3 or 4 false messiahs. Let's go to the 2nd century, 132 to 135 AD. Now, being good Bible students, you're familiar with 70 AD and the war with Rome, 66 to 70 AD. There was a second war that the Jewish people in Israel had with Rome, and it is called really the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So in 132 AD, a Jewish man with the support of a great rabbi named Rabbi Akiva claimed to be the Messiah. His name was Simon ben Kokhba, but they gave him the name Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba. Bar is Aramaic for son of. Kokhba is Aramaic for star. And so Rabbi Akiva, a great rabbi in the 2nd century, but was deceived, said he's the Messiah. He's going to lead us against Rome, and what we lost in 70, we are going to regain. We're going to regain Jerusalem, and Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, will tell us about him and show us the way. That looks like Hadrian. Hadrian was the one who led the fight against Bar Kokhba. Okay, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. The war lasted from 132 to 135 AD. Started off pretty well. The Jewish forces under Bar Kokhba were successful, but then things turned bad. And after 3 years, right below Jerusalem, in a place called Betar, Bar Kokhba was surrounded. The Jews were surrounded, and they were slaughtered. And if you think the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD was bad, let me tell you, this was worse. This was worse. Judea was completely emptied of Jews. Any Jews left in the country lived up in Galilee from then on. The Nazis used the terrible word Judenrein, cleansed of Jews. Well, Rome used that when they slaughtered thousands and thousands of Jews. We hear much about Masada, and rightly so, and the war with Rome in 66 to 70. But historians tell us that even though there's not as many records because there wasn't a Josephus to record it like there was in the first Jewish war, it was actually worse for the Jewish people. So, and that's all because what? They put their trust in somebody who was the son of the star. Why was he called son of the star? In Numbers 24:17, the unlikely quote prophet unquote Balaam said, "I see him. I see a star. I see a star," and so that prophecy there in Numbers 24:17 about the star was applied to this man, Simon ben Kokhba, and they called him the son of the star. Well, it ended up broken hearts, terrible slaughter. Jerusalem became completely empty of all Jews. It became a Jewish, it became a Gentile town. They actually renamed the town Aelia Capitolina, the Julian capital, Aelia Capitolina, to erase any Jerusalem, any biblical or Jewish connection with the city. It was horrible, and any Jews that were left were up in Galilee. No Jews in Jerusalem. Jerusalem became a Gentile town. That is the time when the word Palestine was invented. The area was never called Palestine until 135 AD. They renamed the area, which had been called Judea, and they didn't want any name like the Roman province of Judea because that, has the word Jew in there. And so they renamed the whole province Syria Palestina. And Palestina is the Latin for the Philistines. And it was a deliberate effort on the part of the Romans to rub out any Jewish connection with the country. We're going to rename it after its ancient pagan people called the Philistines. And in Latin, that's Palestina. So that's when it became to be called Palestine. That's not a biblical name for the land at all, but it was a name given to the land after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Well, sad, sad story. Won't spend as much time on the second and third one, but even though the Jews were burned by this false Messiah, later on in the Middle Ages began a number of people. Now, by that time, the Muslims had come in, the Turks had come in, and all of the Middle East was ruled over by Muslims, and particularly the Turks. Well, being overrun by the Turks, here comes some false messiahs. David Alroy announced himself as the Messiah to the Jews of Babylon in 1147 AD. He summoned his followers to revolt against the king and then to capture Jerusalem. But he was soon assassinated by his father-in-law. Another false messiah comes and is gone. Solomon Malco, a Portuguese Marrano. Don't know if you're familiar with the term Marrano, but in the 1400s, the Christian kings were able to get rid of the Muslims in Spain and Portugal and kick them back to Africa. And so that raised a very interesting thing, what to do with these Jews who had converted to Christianity. Some of them converted under false pretenses, and they continued to practice their Judaism in secret. In Spain, they are the Spanish Marranos. And then in Portugal, the same thing. When Jews were kicked out of Spain, some of them went over into Portugal. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and King Ferdinand got rid of the Jew, okay? So Jews were kicked out. Some of them went to North Africa. Some of them went to Portugal. And then in 1496, the same thing happened. They kicked them out. So there had been a number of Jews that had outwardly converted to Christianity, but continued to practice Christianity being Roman Catholicism, I should say, but they continued to practice their Judaism secretly. They would light Sabbath candles. They would say Hebrew prayers at home, but not go to the synagogue. They were called Marranos because they continued to practice their Judaism secretly. Actually, the Marranos actually survived till the 20th century. In 1948, Israel said, hey, you guys that are still practicing your Judaism secretly, you can come to the land of Israel. You don't have to be secret Jews. Well, Solomon Malco was a Portuguese Marrano who went back to Judaism, traveled from his native home in Turkey and Palestine, seeking to arouse interest in a joint Jewish-Christian mission to free the Holy Land from the Muslims. After presenting himself as the Messiah in Greece in 1530, about the time of the Reformation, he was arrested, tried by the Inquisition for converting back to Judaism, and he was burned at the stake. Many of those Marranos who had outwardly converted to Roman Catholicism and continued to practice their Judaism secretly died in the Inquisition because you're Christians now, you're not supposed to be observing Judaism. So he was burned at the stake. I've just mentioned three of 24 of false messiahs that broke the hearts of Jewish people in that regard. So that was Solomon Malka. Now we get to the most famous one before we come down to the present day. His name was Sabbatai Zevi. Sabbatai Zevi. One of our workers in Israel was named Zvi. It means deer, Deer. Now, this was another man, Sabbatai Zevi. He undoubtedly is the most famous and the most successful pseudo-Messiah in Jewish history, without a doubt. He gained thousands of followers all over Europe by 1665. Now, this is 100 years after the Reformation. Quite successful. Many were following him. So he finally got up enough courage. He lived in, there he is, Sabbatai Zevi. Thank you very much. Yeah, I remember him. He looks just like that. So here he is pointing to some sort of text, but it's not the Bible text. It is the Zohar, because many of these false messiahs were claiming their messiahship not because of biblical texts, but because of mystical texts in the Jewish view of Kabbalah. And here he is. So but he got a lot of followers. Got a lot of followers. I've been to Smyrna. It's called Izmir today. And I was walking along in Izmir looking for the Roman ruins. And here I see home of Sabbatai Zevi. Wow. They still maintain his house there in Izmir, Turkey, or Smyrna, one of the 7 churches of Revelation. Well, what happened? He was bold and said, okay, let's demand from the Turkish Sultan that he be allowed to lead the Jewish people back to the Holy Land. Sounds great, huh? Well, the Sultan was not impressed with that. He threw Sabbatai Zevi in prison, and in 1666, soon thereafter, the news came out that Sabbatai Zevi, this Messiah, had converted to Islam. And his crushed devotees heard the terrible news that their so-called Messiah had actually converted to Islam. He died in exile 10 years later. Now, if these are sad stories, I can believe they are. I've only given you 3 or 4. The most famous ones, Sabbatai Zevi and Bar Kokhba. But what they led to was broken hearts. What they led to was disappointed people. What they led to was a lifting of hopes and then dashing them. Why? Because their claim to be the Messiah was not based on biblical texts, but on mystical, Kabbalistic, Zohar texts, numerology. I know that some folks are really into numerology. You need to be careful. You can almost prove anything by numerology. So a lot of the so-called proofs for these messiahs were the mixing around of numbers to come up with Messiah. So their proofs for their messiahship were not based on Old Testament biblical texts. We'll make that very clear next week. None of them claimed to be born in Bethlehem. None of them claimed to come before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. None of them claimed to be born miraculously of an Alma virgin. None of them died and rose again. They didn't have any of those characteristics that are characteristics of the true Messiah. So they broke a lot of people's hearts. Now, that doesn't mean that Jews gave up on the Messiah. Maimonides in the 12th century gave 12 principles of the Messiah, and here's one of them. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and though he tarry, I will wait daily for his coming. So Jews still believed in the Messiah, but he was not a suffering Messiah. They had had enough of suffering messiahs, messiahs that had broken their hearts. They were looking for a military Messiah. Well, there's one more. and that is Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Okay. After Sabbatai Zevi, there were no more messiahs coming along. Jews had their stomach full of these false messiahs. So, but then about 40 years ago, the rabbi of the Hasidic group called the Lubavitchers began to be referred to as the Messiah. His name, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, survivor of the Holocaust, head of the Lubavitcher Hasidim in New York. And there he is. There he is in his older years, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Now, what do we say about him? Here's the deal about Schneerson. He never said, I am the Messiah. But many of his followers believed he was the Messiah. I have seen videos of him coming into a room with hundreds of those Hasidic Lubavitcher rabbis and their students, and you can hear them chanting, Ha Mashiach, Ha Mashiach, Ha Mashiach. That's Hebrew for the Messiah. They were chanting it over and over and over. In other words, they were calling him the Messiah. Now, I've seen in those videos, he didn't say, oh, no, guys, stop. I'm not the Messiah. He never told them to stop. So by the fact that he never said, I am the Messiah, he really actually claimed to be the Messiah by not denying it. That said, those are signs that were in Jerusalem. You can see Hamelech Hamashiach. That means the King Messiah. And there he is, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Hasidic rabbi. Now, I read about this. I couldn't believe it when I was doing research for today. 30 years ago, he passed. Now, rumors of his resurrection have been greatly exaggerated. In other words, there are no rumors of his resurrection. He's still dead. But that has caused some of his ardent followers to say, you know, he really didn't die. He just slipped into the background, and he will come back at the appropriate time. Yes, somebody's asking a question, a list of the prophecies. Yes, tune in next week, and we'll talk about that. Now, we're running out of time today, and I want to leave an opportunity for some questions. But getting back to Hamashiach, the one who never said, I'm the Messiah, but never denied his followers calling him that. 30 years ago, he passed. I like that. Sometimes we use that expression, he passed, but oftentimes when they speak about the death of Schneerson, they won't say he died. They say he passed, because many of them among the Lubavitchers still believe he is still around and he will be the Messiah. Hey, listen, don't bet on it. All right. 30 years he's gone. It took Jesus 3 days, not 30 years. So there's the difference. So, wow, it's a sad story of the Jewish messiahs. And let me just close this section of my tract by saying this. Apart from being wrong, each of the pseudo-messiahs had one other factor in common. None of them met the qualifications mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures that would characterize the Messiah. Most of them ignored these biblical qualifications and based their messianic claim on so-called miracles, supposed visions, and involved numerical calculations based on the Jewish mysticism of Kabbalah. Had the people measured them by the biblical characteristics, which some of you already know very well, and that we'll explore more in detail next week, they would have not been fooled by these pseudo-messiahs, and they wouldn't have their hearts broken. Although the Tanakh mentions many messianic qualifications, what I'd like to do next week is look at 4. Now, some of you say, well, I know the Messianic prophecies. Well, maybe we can take a fresh look at some of them that might be familiar to you, but I'm going to introduce a way of looking at a few of them that might be a fresh way of seeing them. So, false messiahs this week, true messiah next week.